Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
What we have here, I think, it isn't just a survey of philosophical history. Not at all.
No, definitely not.
It's more like the ultimate playbook, maybe?
Yeah.
A masterclass in the core intellectual tools you actually need for, well, systematic wisdom.
That's a great way to put it. Systematic wisdom.
Yeah, and if you've ever felt just completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of knowledge out there today, I mean, who hasn't?
Right. It's an avalanche.
Exactly. So this deep dive, it's designed to give you that philosophical architecture, the structure you need to kind of organize it all.
That's absolutely right. We're sort of channeling the vision of Will Durant here, you could say.
Durant, yeah. He had that great point about synthesis.
He really did. He saw that science, it excels at breaking the world down into all these specialized fields, physics, biology, chemistry, you name it.
Hyper-specialization.
Precisely. But then, Durant says, it's philosophy that has to synthesize all that specialized knowledge.
Yeah.
It has to bring it back together.
Okay, so its purpose is different. It's about coordination.
Exactly. Philosophy's job is to coordinate all that human experience into one sort of unified, coherent view of life. That's how you get from just knowing stuff, knowledge, to actual wisdom.
And Durant also suggested, crucially, I think, that this whole systematic pursuit of wisdom, it isn't just some, nice academic thing to do.
No, not at all. It becomes urgent.
Urgent, right. Especially during moments of historical crisis. He talked about when the traditional authorities, maybe religious structures, political pillars, when they start to break down.
Yeah, when the old answers don't work anymore.
We're kind of forced then, aren't we, to find a new, maybe more rational internal authority to guide us.
That's the idea. And you look around today, I mean, the pace of technological change, social upheaval.
It certainly feels like one of those moments, doesn't it?
It really does. You could argue we are adrift without a proper philosophical compass right now.
So building that compass, that's the task.
That's the task. And to do that, we need to grasp the scope. Durant, he laid out 5 foundational fields for philosophy.
Okay, what were they again?
Logic, aesthetics, ethics, politics, and metaphysics. The big ones.
Right, the classic.
And our task today, really, is to synthesize the most crucial, the most insightful arguments across, well, we're tackling 6 major intellectual domains, starting right at the beginning.
Where do you even start with that?
With the bedrock, the structure of clarity itself, how we even think clearly.
Okay. So the ultimate mission for you, the listener, isn't just to sort of passively hear these ideas.
No, it's active.
It's to really master this map of truth created by some of the greatest thinkers. How they approached clarity, how they figured out the good life, what they thought reality is.
It's a huge undertaking, no doubt.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I guess we have to start by just learning how to build an argument properly in the first place. Is that fair?
That's exactly where we need to begin, which takes us straight into logic, domain 1.
Okay. Logic.
We really have to start with someone like Irving Copey, his core definition. Logic isn't just, thinking. Anyone can think.
Right.
It's the formal study of valid thought. It provides that objective standard, like a universal mechanism, almost, that we use to distinguish reasoning that is absolutely correct from reasoning that's incorrect.
So it's the rule book for thinking, before you figure out what's moral or what's real.
Exactly. Before any of that, you have to make sure your mental engine is actually running properly. You need the right tools.
And that engine needs clear parts, I suppose. Copey, he really forces clarity by making us distinguish the building blocks, doesn't he?
He does. First up, you've got propositions.
Propositions, okay.
These are the basic units of meaning. Simple declarative statements. Stuff like, the sky is blue, or all cats are mammals. They are inherently either true or false. That's key.
They make a claim about the world, an objective claim.
Precisely. And then you build arguments out of those propositions.
Okay, so an argument isn't just yelling at someone.
No, not in logic anyway. An argument is a structure. It's where one proposition that's your conclusion is claimed to follow from or be supported by other propositions. Those are your premises.
Premises support a conclusion. Got it.
And this distinction, it's absolutely vital. If you can't cleanly separate your premises, your evidence, basically from your conclusion, the claim you're making, you just can't rigorously test your own belief structure or anyone else's.
Okay, so that's the structure. How do you test it? Where does the rigor come in?
Right, the testing. It comes in 2 main forms that pretty much all philosophical reasoning relies on. First, there's deductive reasoning.
Deduction. Okay, I think I know this one. This is about certainty.
Exactly. When you're reasoning deductively, you're aiming for validity and ultimately soundness. The real power of deduction is this. If your premises are true and the argument form is valid, the conclusion must be true. It's guaranteed.
Like math proofs. Or maybe a really tight legal argument.
Perfect examples. It's demonstrative certainty. If I lay out. Premise 1. All men are mortal. Premise 2. Socrates is a man. Conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. That conclusion is absolutely guaranteed by the structure and the truth of the premises.
Okay, airtight.
But then there's inductive reasoning. And this is different. It only aims for strength or maybe cogency.
So not guaranteed?
Not guaranteed. Here, true premises only make the conclusion probable, maybe highly probable, but never certain in the deductive sense.
Okay. So this is more like the reasoning we use every day. Like if I say, the sun has risen every single day in recorded history. Therefore, the sun will rise tomorrow. That feels pretty certain.
It feels certain, and it's an incredibly strong inductive argument, but logically, technically, it's not a 100% guarantee. Something could change, right? Theoretically.
Right. Okay. So deduction is the guarantee. Induction is probability.
You got it. And this formal system, the kind laid out by Copy and others, it gives us the structure we need for any serious philosophical debate, or scientific inquiry, too. It sets the rules of the game, you know?
It creates a level playing field for arguments.
Yeah.
But here's where, for me, it gets really fascinating. Because then someone like W.V.O. Quine comes along.
Quine. Yeah.
And he takes that neat, formal, logical structure and immediately starts poking holes in the very foundation of its certainty.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Quine is, well, he's famous for challenging the very nature of analytical certainty, especially in his paper, Two Dogmas of Empiricism.
Two dogmas, right.
He basically attacked this idea that there's a really strict, clean firewall between two kinds of statements.
Okay.
On one side, analytic statements. These are supposed to be true just based on the meaning of the words, like the classic example, all bachelors are unmarried. True by definition.
Okay, that seems clear enough. What's the other side?
Synthetic statements. These are truths based on empirical facts, things we observe out there in the world, like the cat is on the mat. You have to look to see if it's true.
Analytic synthetic. Seems like a pretty basic, obvious distinction. Why does rejecting that matter so much for logic's supposedly rock-solid foundation?
Well, think about it. If that distinction collapses, or even just gets blurry,
Yeah.
it means that the absolute clarity and certainty we usually attribute to logic and math, it isn't just true by convention or true by definition alone, like we thought.
So what is it then?
Quine suggests that even our core logical principles, like the law of non-contradiction or something, are actually intertwined with our entire theory of the world, our whole web of belief.
Whoa, okay, slow down. Intertwine how?
They're like the fundamental concepts, the central threads in that web that we use to make sense of all sensory input, all experience. They're not separate from the world. They're our best way of organizing it.
So instead of logic being this, like, neutral set of rules we just agree to use, it becomes our most successful, maybe our most indispensable framework for just achieving coherence, for making anything make sense at all.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And this connects back to that famous infinite regress problem Quine also talked about. You can't establish logic by some convention or agreement.
Why not?
Because you'd have to use logic in the first place to figure out the consequences of that agreement. You're already using the thing you're trying to establish.
Okay. It's circular.
It's deeply circular, which means logic isn't just a tool we pick up and use. It's more like the intellectual air we breathe. It's fundamental.
Okay. The profound implication here, then, for you listening, is that reasoning isn't just a subject you learn, like in a class.
Not at all.
It's more like the deepest, most fundamental commitment your mind has to make if you actually want to approach this idea of systematic wisdom, if you want to build a coherent worldview that holds together.
It's the starting point and the constant guide.
Okay, so we've got the structures now, the how of thinking clearly, thanks to logic and Quine's deep dive into it. Now we shift, right, to the why.
Exactly. Why do we bother reasoning? What's the purpose? That brings us to action. Purpose. The good life. Domain 2. Human values.
You basically have to start with Aristotle here, don't you? He's kind of the first pillar for ethical thinking.
He really is. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle gives us this foundational teleological argument. Telos meaning end or purpose.
Right, purpose-driven.
He argues that every single human action, every skill, every pursuit, it always aims at some good. But these little individual goods, like eating a good meal or learning a skill, they must all ultimately point towards one final, supreme good,
A highest good.
Yeah, something that's desired purely for its own sake, not for the sake of anything else. And he gives it a name.
Eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. Now, we often translate that as happiness, but I always feel like that translation is just too thin, isn't it?
It is far too thin. It makes it sound like just, feeling cheerful or having fleeting pleasure.
Like eating a tub of ice cream, maybe. Exactly. That might be a good of fleeting pleasure, sure, but Aristotle would say it's subordinate to the higher, the long-term good of, say, a healthy, productive life. Eudaimonia is much bigger.
So what's a better translation?
Flourishing is pretty good.
Yeah.
Or maybe living well, human flourishing. To achieve eudaimonia is to fully realize your potential as a human being. It's the state of a life lived well, from start to finish.
Okay, flourishing, that feels more substantial. And Aristotle, he logically connects that flourishing back to our rational structure, which you just talked about. That seems vital for this whole deep dive.
It's absolutely central. He asks this key question. What is the function, the ergon of a human being? What's our unique job, essentially?
And his answer is?
Reason. Since reason is our characteristic activity, the thing that sets us apart, the supreme good eudaimonia must be an activity of the soul that's in accordance with reason.
Activity of the soul in accordance with reason.
Which is what he calls virtue, or our us-so.
Excellence.
So living virtuously, using reason well, that's flourishing. That's the core of it. And to achieve that virtue, we need something else. Practical wisdom. Phronesis.
Practical wisdom. Why practical?
Because ethical virtue, for Aristotle, isn't some abstract rule. It's always the middle ground between two vices. One vice is an excess, too much of something, and the other is a deficiency, too little.
The famous golden mean. Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about the virtue of courage. For Aristotle, courage is the mean. The vice of excess would be foolhardy rashness, just charging in without thinking.
Okay, too much.
And the vice of deficiency would be cowardice, being paralyzed by fear, not acting when you should.
Too little. So courage is right in the middle.
Right in the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And this is a crucial finding that mean isn't a simple formula. It's not always 50-50.
It depends on the situation.
Exactly. Determining the truly courageous action in a specific, maybe terrifying circumstance requires rigorous phronesis, that practical wisdom is the rational ability to perceive the situation accurately and calculate the right balance, the right action, right here, right now.
Okay, so ethics for Aristotle is grounded firmly in rational excellence, in developing good character, and using practical wisdom.
That's a perfect summary. But
Yeah.
then the focus shifts radically when we jump forward to Immanuel Kant.
Right. Kant. Duty-based ethics. Very different feel.
Completely different. Kant basically says, forget consequences, forget even character development in Aristotle's sense. We need to focus entirely on the motive behind the action. Why did you do it?
The motive. Okay. And for Kant, the only thing that's truly good without qualification, like intrinsically valuable no matter what, is the goodwill. Is that right?
Precisely. The goodwill. Think about it.
Yeah.
Happiness, intelligence, even virtues like courage. Kant argued these can all be used by a malicious person for terrible ends. A smart, courageous villain is still bad.
Right. You can use good qualities for bad purposes.
But a will that is motivated purely by acting from duty, just out of sheer respect for the moral law itself, that will is good in itself. Regardless of whether the action succeeds or fails, regardless of the consequences, the intention is everything.
Acting from duty.
Right.
And that duty comes from?
The universally binding moral law, which he calls the categorical imperative.
Ah, the famous categorical imperative. This is where the real force of Kantian ethics lies, isn't it?
It really is. And we absolutely have to detail the two critical formulations he gives, because they are incredibly powerful tests for any moral claim you might encounter.
Okay, formulation one.
The first is the universal law formula. Basically, you ask, can the maxim, that's the underlying principle or rule behind your action, can it be rationally willed to become a universal law for everyone without creating a contradiction?
So could everyone do this? Is it logically consistent if universalized?
Exactly. It's a test of logical consistency applied to morality. If the world somehow breaks down logically, or the action itself becomes self-defeating when everyone does it, then that action is morally impermissible. Full stop.
Can you give an example of how that works?
Sure. The classic one is lying. Imagine you want to lie to get out of a difficult situation. The maxim is something like, it's okay to lie when it's convenient for me. Now, universalize that. Kant says, ask, can I rationally will that everyone should lie whenever it's convenient for them?
Probably not.
Why not? Because if everyone lied constantly whenever it suited them, the whole institution of truth-telling and promises would collapse. No one would believe anyone.
Right. And then lying itself wouldn't even work because it depends on people usually expecting the truth.
Precisely. The universalized maxim leads to a contradiction.
Yeah.
It destroys the very possibility of the action it permits. So lying out of convenience fails the test. It's irrational, therefore immoral.
Okay, that's a powerful test. What's the second formulation?
The second one, and maybe even more influential today, is the humanity formula.
Humanity. Okay.
It goes like this. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means, but always at the same time as an end.
Never merely as a means, always as an end. What does that mean practically?
It means you cannot just use people like objects, like tools, simply to achieve your own goals. You have to always recognize and respect them as autonomous, rational beings who have their own goals, their own value systems, their own ends.
So it's about dignity, respecting inherent worth.
Exactly. It's the cornerstone of human dignity in Kant's system. And this formulation provides a really clear, often anti-utilitarian test for justice. It forces us to respect individual rights and dignity, regardless of whether violating them might produce better overall consequences for the group.
Okay, yeah, that is a direct challenge to utilitarianism, which focuses precisely on those overall consequences.
It absolutely is.
Which makes it a perfect segue, actually, to utilitarianism itself. And Peter Singer's work is a great example of how consequentialist ethics focusing on outcomes gets applied on a massive, often provocative modern scale.
Singer is definitely a key figure here. His whole ethical framework really rests on one core principle, the principle of equal consideration of interests.
Equal consideration of interests. Sounds simple enough.
The principle itself is simple. It just demands that the suffering or the enjoyment, the interests of any being, must be given equal weight, equal consideration, to the like suffering or enjoyment of any other being.
Okay, like suffering. So it doesn't mean all interests are identical.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
A mouse clearly doesn't have an interest in voting or getting a college degree. But, Singer argues, if a being can suffer pain or experience pleasure, then that capacity makes its interests count morally. And that pain or pleasure counts equally with the same amount of pain or pleasure experienced by anyone else, regardless of their species, race, gender, whatever.
So the capacity to suffer is key.
That's his criterion. And this demand for consistency, for applying that equal consideration principle universally, leads Singer to argue very strongly against speciesism.
Speciesism, like racism or sexism, but based on species.
Precisely. Prejudice or discrimination based purely on species membership. Singer asserts that sentience, just the basic capacity to suffer or experience pleasure, is the only morally relevant criterion for having your interests considered.
Wow, so if something is sentient.
Its interests matter ethically, full stop, regardless of whether it's a human, a chimpanzee, a dog, a pig. If it can suffer, that suffering deserves equal consideration.
That obviously has huge implications for things like animal agriculture, animal experimentation.
Massive implications. It forces us to radically expand our moral circle, the range of beings whose interests we feel obligated to consider. And it makes ethics immediately, practically applicable to a huge range of issues, from global poverty, where human suffering is immense, to environmental decisions that impact sentient non-humans.
Okay, so we've got Aristotle's goal of flourishing, Kant's focus on duty and the moral law, and Singer's application of consequences and expanding the circle. That covers a lot of ethical ground.
It really does, but there's a kind of underlying structure holding all these different approaches together, or at least a field that studies the structure itself, and that's axiology.
Axiology, the study of value itself.
Exactly, the theory of value. Thinkers like Wilbur Marshall Urban, early 20th century, recognized the need for axiology as its own distinct philosophical discipline.
Why? What was the problem it was trying to solve?
Urban pointed out this inherent complexity, this kind of dual nature that value seems to have. On the one hand, value feels objective. Universal, maybe structural, like Kant's moral law seems to be. It feels like some values are just true, regardless of what we think.
Okay, objective value, like murder is wrong.
Right. But on the other hand, value is also deeply subjective. It's experienced, it's felt, it's connected to pleasure, desire, appreciation, the kinds of things Aristotle talked about with finding the mean or the pleasure Singer focuses on.
So it feels both out there, universal, and in here, personal.
Exactly. And the challenge for axiology is profound.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile those two aspects? If value is only subjective, doesn't just dissolve into whatever feels good to me, mere personal taste,
Uh,
relativism.
yeah, seems like it loses its force.
But if it's only objective, maybe it becomes too cold, too abstract, too sterile to actually motivate us to act. How does a purely abstract law make me want to do the right thing?
Good question.
So Urban and others in axiology sought a coherent theory that could explain both sides. How does our subjective experience, our feeling and desiring, actually connect with or apprehend universal objective value? Finding that connection provides the essential infrastructure, you could say, for all our moral judgments and our aesthetic judgments, too. It's foundational for understanding anything we call good or bad, right or wrong, beautiful or ugly.
Okay, moving from value, what's good, to certainty. What can we actually know? This feels like a really fundamental shift. We're entering epistemology, right? The study of knowledge itself.
Exactly. If we're aiming for wisdom, we absolutely have to understand the limits and the sources of what we can reliably claim to know. How do we justify our beliefs?
And the figure who throws down the biggest challenge here, the one who sets the stage for so much modern doubt, has got to be David Hume.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Hume is the radical empiricist. Some would say the ultimate skeptic, at least about certain kinds of knowledge.
Empiricist meaning knowledge comes from experience.
Primarily from sense experience, yes. He famously divides all the objects of human reason, everything we can possibly think about, into just two categories.
Okay, what are they?
First, relations of ideas. These are things that are certain, knowable a priori meaning, independent of experience. Think of mathematics, geometry, logic. A triangle has three sides. You don't need to go out and measure triangles to know that. It's true by definition, by the relations between the ideas themselves.
Okay, certain, but maybe just about definitions. What's the other category?
Matters of fact. These are things that are uncertain, knowable only a posteriori meaning based on sense experience of the world. The sun is shining, my keys are on the table. You have to look, you have to use your senses to check.
Relations of ideas, certain, a priori. Matters of fact, uncertain, a posteriori. Seems clear, so where's the big problem?
The big problem arises with matters of fact.
Yeah.
Hume delivers this devastating critique, what we now call the problem of induction.
Induction again. Like the sun rising tomorrow.
Exactly like that. Hume argues that our belief in causality, the idea that cause A must necessarily lead to effect B in the future, just because it always has in the past, is not based on any rational justification. We have no logical proof for it.
Wait, no logical proof that releasing the coffee cup must make it fall.
Nope. All we ever observe, Hume says, is a constant conjunction of events. We see event A, releasing the cup, followed consistently by event B, cup falling. We never actually see the necessary connection, the must.
We just see one thing after another.
Right. So our belief that the future will resemble the past, our confidence that the cup will fall tomorrow just like it did today, is based purely on custom, habit, or maybe some kind of psychological instinct. It's not based on reason.
Wow. That's huge. That seems to undercut almost all of science, doesn't it? And just daily life. We predict things constantly based on past experience.
It's profoundly destabilizing. It pulls the rug out from under the certainty of virtually all empirical knowledge, all knowledge based on observation and prediction. It's a non-rational faith in the uniformity of nature, as you said earlier.
Okay, so Hume leaves us with radical doubt about anything we learn through experience.
Pretty much. And that deep skepticism is precisely why someone like René Descartes, coming a bit earlier but wrestling with similar issues of certainty, felt absolutely compelled to find a different foundation for knowledge. He wanted absolute certainty, and he decided he couldn't get it from the senses.
Right, Descartes. He's the quintessential rationalist, the other side of the coin from Hume's empiricism. Knowledge comes from reason first.
Exactly. And he begins with that method of radical doubt. He decides to systematically try and eliminate every possible source of error, anything that could possibly be doubted.
He doubts the senses, right, because they can deceive us. Dreams feel real.
He doubts the senses. He doubts the existence of the external world entirely. Maybe it's all a dream or an illusion created by an evil demon. He even momentarily doubts logical connections. He pushes doubt to its absolute limit. He wants to know, is there anything left that is completely, absolutely, indubitably true?
And he finds one thing.
He finds one thing, the bedrock. His own existence as a thinking thing. The famous cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
Explain that again. Why is that certain?
Because even if an evil demon is deceiving me about absolutely everything else, the world, my body, math, I must exist as a thinking thing in order to be deceived. The very act of doubting proves the existence of the doubter. thinking proves existence.
Ah, okay. The act of thinking itself can't be doubted without performing the act.
Exactly. So the cogito becomes his absolutely certain rational starting point, a point of certainty he believes he secured prior to, or independent of, any potentially misleading sense experience.
Okay, so we have this clear tension. Hume starts with experience, digs down, and finds this bedrock of custom and habit, leading to uncertainty about the world. Descartes starts with reason, doubts everything, and finds this bedrock of the thinking self, claiming absolute certainty there.
That's the classic standoff, and it sets the stage for William James and pragmatism, which offers a kind of third way, different approach to manage this whole problem of certainty versus skepticism.
Pragmatism. So, not focused on where knowledge comes from, reason or experience, but what?
But on what it does, James shifts the focus away from the origin of an idea. Is it purely rational? Is it purely empirical? And looks instead at its consequences in our lives. For James, the truth of a belief is determined by its working, its practical effectiveness, its cash value, basically. Does it help us successfully navigate and cope with reality?
Okay, so truth isn't about perfectly mirroring some external reality.
Not necessarily. He famously said, truth happens to an idea. It becomes true, is made true by events. This means knowledge isn't some static, passive mirror reflecting a fixed reality. It's an active, dynamic, ever-adjusting tool that we use to engage with that complex, pluralistic, constantly evolving world.
So back to Hume's problem. If my belief that the cup will fall works consistently, helps me predict and manage the world successfully.
Then for James, that belief possesses truth value. It's true because it works. Pragmatism lowers the bar for truth from absolute certainty to practical utility. It makes knowledge flexible, adaptable.
Interesting. A very American philosophy, perhaps. Focused on results.
Often seen that way, yes. But it's a powerful response to the deadlock between rationalism and empiricism.
Okay, one more crucial layer here in epistemology. We have to think about the context in which all this knowledge-seeking happens. Edward Said brings this in powerfully.
Yes, Seed's concept of worldly criticism is essential. He fundamentally challenges that whole traditional notion of the philosopher or the intellectual as some kind of pure, detached, objective observer standing outside the world.
The view from nowhere.
Exactly. Sader argues that all intellectual inquiry, all knowledge production, is fundamentally worldly. It's always embedded in specific institutions, histories, cultures, and relations of power. There is no view from nowhere. Knowledge creation is never neutral. It always happens somewhere, by someone, with certain interests and contexts at play.
So this isn't just about abstract theories of knowledge anymore. It's about power.
It adds a crucial ethical and political dimension to epistemology. The pursuit of clarity copies logic. Descartes' certainty must become self-aware. The critic, the thinker, has to be conscious of their own position, their own potential biases, and their ethical responsibility for the knowledge they produce and how it might be used.
So, if knowledge is tied to power, philosophers and scientists need to wield their intellectual tools with a profound ethical awareness of the impact they have.
That's Sade's challenge. It makes epistemology inherently political and ethical, not just a technical exercise.
Okay, but all this talk about how we know things, epistemology, whether we can be certain, Descartes, or if we should doubt Hume, it all kind of begs the biggest question, doesn't it? Certainty or doubt about what?
Exactly. What is the what? What is fundamentally real? That pushes us into the next domain. Metaphysics, the study of reality itself.
Aristotle called this first philosophy, right? Because it deals with the most fundamental questions.
He did. He defined it as the study of being qua being. Sounds a bit obscure.
Yeah, what does being qua being actually mean?
It means studying existence as existence, not studying particular kinds of things that exist, like physics studies motion or biology studies life, but studying the fundamental nature of reality, existence, being itself. What does it mean to be?
Okay, the ultimate abstract question. How did Aristotle approach it?
His central concept here is substance, ousia in Greek. He argued that any individual existing thing, this table, that tree, you, me, is fundamentally a composite, a combination of two primary elements.
Two elements make up everything. What are they?
Form and matter. Form is the essence, the blueprint, the structure, the whatness that makes a thing the specific kind of thing it is. Matter is the stuff, the potentiality, the material it's made of.
Okay, can you use an example? Like a house.
Perfect. The matter of the house is the lumber, the bricks, the wires, the concrete, all the physical stuff. But that stuff isn't a house yet.
Right, it's just a pile of materials.
Exactly. The form is the architect's blueprint. The specific arrangement and structure of that matter is a house. That form, that structure, is essential to its substance, to it being a house. The substance is the formed matter.
Form plus matter equals substance. Okay.
And this framework, form and matter, it also allows Aristotle to give a really powerful explanation for change. How do things become different?
Right. The world isn't static.
He understood reality as involving this constant movement from potentiality, dynamis, to actuality,
Yeah.
energia. Matter represents the potential, and form represents the actualization of that potential.
Like an acorn.
Exactly. The acorn has the potentiality, dynamis, to become a mighty oak tree. The process of growth, guided by the form or blueprint within the acorn, is the gradual realization, the actuality energia of that potential. This gives us a really rigorous, rational framework for analyzing existence, development, and change throughout the natural world.
Okay, Aristotle gives us substance, form, matter, potentiality, actuality, a whole system for analyzing what exists. But then, much later, Martin Heidegger comes along and says philosophy kind of missed the point.
That's Heidegger's radical claim in Being and Time. He argues that the entire history of Western philosophy, starting pretty much right after Aristotle, forgot the real question, the question of being itself.
Forgot the question of being. What does that mean? Weren't they talking about reality?
They were talking about beings, the things that exist, substances, objects, God, minds, matter. But Heidegger says they skipped over the more fundamental question, what does it mean to be in the first place? What is the meaning of being itself before we even start carving it up into different kinds of beings?
Okay, so how do you even ask that question? How do you access being itself?
Heidegger's unique approach is to say, the only access we have to the meaning of being is through analyzing the one being for whom being is actually an issue. And that's us, human existence.
So we have to study ourselves to understand reality.
Yes. He uses the term Dasein, which literally means being there, to refer to human existence. For Heidegger, ontology, the study of reality of being, becomes tied directly to the nature of our existence, Dasein. And Dasein's existence is fundamentally temporal, lived towards death, concerned with possibilities. Dasein is the being whose very existence is defined by the fact that it cares about and asks the question of being.
Wow. Okay, so reality isn't just out there for Heidegger. It's intimately tied to the structure of our own human way of being in the world.
That's the core of his phenomenological approach,
Yeah.
very different from Aristotle's focus on substance.
So this long history of thinking about reality from Aristotle through Heidegger and beyond, it seems to lead to these big fundamental splits in worldviews about what ultimately constitutes reality.
Absolutely, you get these major isms battling it out. We should probably touch on the big three classical ones.
Okay, let's start with idealism.
Idealism, especially in its grand form like with Hegel, argues that ultimate reality isn't matter, it's spirit, Geist, or idea, or consciousness. The physical world, history, everything we see, is essentially the rational, logical, self-unfolding or self-manifestation of this absolute mind or spirit.
So mind comes first, matter is secondary or just an appearance of mind.
That's the gist of it, yes. Reality is fundamentally mental or spiritual.
Okay, what's the opposite view?
Well, a strong contender is realism, particularly the kind championed by thinkers like Bertrand Russell, influenced by logic. Realism asserts that reality exists independently of our minds, our thoughts, our perceptions. There's a real external world out there.
And philosophy's job is just to describe it accurately.
Pretty much. Using the tools of logic and science, philosophy should aim to create an accurate representation or map of this external, mind-independent world. What you see is, more or less, what you get.
Okay, idealism, mind first. Realism, world first. What's the third major player?
Materialism, often associated with figures like Engels, building on Marx, though it has ancient roots too. Materialism argues that reality is fundamentally, at bottom, just matter and its physical interactions and transformations.
Everything is physical stuff.
Everything is physical stuff. Consciousness, human thought, ideas, these aren't separate substances or primary realities. They are secondary properties, maybe epiphenomena, that emerge from matter when it becomes organized in a specific, highly complex way, like in the human brain. Mind arises from matter.
Idealism, realism, materialism. The big three ways of slicing the reality pie.
You could say that, and these debates continue, though often in more nuanced forms.
Which brings us to the modern era and the influence of science on these metaphysical questions. David Papineau's naturalism, for instance. What's that about?
Papineau represents a very strong contemporary view. Naturalism basically demands that metaphysics, our philosophical theories about reality, must be continuous with and informed by our best natural sciences, especially physics.
So philosophy can't just speculate wildly about reality anymore. It has to check in with the scientists.
That's the core idea. If you're going to make claims about what fundamentally exists or how causation works, those claims have to harmonize with, or at least not contradict, what physics tells us about the world.
And what's the key argument for giving physics that kind of authority in metaphysics?
Papineau often anchors this claim on the principle of the causal completeness of physics.
Causal completeness of physics. Okay, what does that mean?
It's the premise, a very well-supported premise from science itself, that all physical events have exclusively physical causes. If you want to explain why a physical event happened, why a billiard ball moved, why a neuron fired in the brain, why a star exploded, the explanation can, in principle, be found entirely within the realm of physics. Forces, energy, matter, fields.
So there's no need to appeal to anything non-physical.
Exactly. If physics can fully explain the cause of every physical event, then any claim about non-physical causes, like a non-material soul or mind, intervening to make your arm move, or some divine intervention changing the weather, becomes scientifically redundant, unnecessary, or simply false, according to this view.
Wow, so that forces metaphysics to become almost an empirical discipline itself, constantly updating its picture of reality based on the latest findings from physics and cosmology.
That's the demand of strong naturalism, yes. Metaphysics, on this view, doesn't get to dictate reality. It has to listen to reality as revealed by science.
Okay, so applying these philosophical tools, logic, ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, to the contemporary world, that inevitably brings us face to face with the dominant systems of knowledge and power today: science and technology.
Absolutely. And Thomas Kuhn's work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is a crucial starting point because it fundamentally challenges our maybe naive, linear view of how science actually progresses.
We tend to think science just accumulates facts, right? Adding bricks to the wall of knowledge.
That's the textbook view. But Kuhn argues it's much more complex and, well, revolutionary than that. He says that normal science, most scientific work operates within these shared conceptual frameworks he calls paradigms.
Paradigms, like a set of shared assumptions and methods.
Exactly. The accepted theories, the key experiments, the standard problems, even the unspoken rules about what counts as a good scientific question or answer, all that forms the paradigm for a particular field at a particular time. Scientists doing normal science are mostly puzzle solving within that established framework.
Okay, so they're not usually trying to overturn the whole thing.
Usually. But Kuhn argues, progress doesn't just happen by accumulation. Major advances often occur through these radical, non-cumulative breaks he calls scientific revolutions.
Revolutions, like Copernicus or Einstein.
Perfect examples. These happen when the old paradigm starts to buckle under the weight of too many anomalies, results that just don't fit, puzzles that can't be solved within the existing rules. Eventually, this crisis leads to a gestalt switch, a fundamental shift in perspective, and a new paradigm emerges.
A whole new way of seeing the world.
A whole new way. And here's where Kuhn really challenges that clean, linear logic we started with, someone like Coppi's view. He introduced the concept of incommensurability.
Incommensurability, meaning?
Meaning that the concepts, the terms, even the standards of evidence within the old paradigm might be fundamentally untranslatable or incomparable to those in the new paradigm. They're just playing different games almost.
So scientists before and after the revolution might be using the same words, but meaning totally different things.
That's the radical idea. Think about the shift from Ptolemy's Earth-centered system to Copernicus's sun-centered one. What they even meant by planet or motion changed profoundly. Kuhn suggests they weren't just disagreeing about facts within a shared framework. They were, in a sense, operating within different conceptual worlds.
So the shift isn't always based on purely logical proof. It's more like a conversion experience.
Kuhn suggests it has elements of that. The decision to adopt a new paradigm often involves factors beyond pure logic, like its promise for future research, its elegance, sometimes even sociological factors within the scientific community. It's a consensus that the new framework simply works better at solving the problems scientists care about. It challenges a simplistic view of scientific rationality.
Okay, that sets the stage nicely for Heidegger again, but this time his critique of technology. Because he argues technology isn't just applied science, it's something much deeper, right?
Much deeper. Heidegger argues that we usually think of technology as just a collection of neutral tools, things we use to achieve our ends. But he says that's superficial. The essence of modern technology is actually a particular way of revealing the world, a mode of being that profoundly structures our reality.
A way of revealing.
How so? He calls the essence of modern technology inframing, or Gestell in German.
In framing. Okay.
In framing is this fundamental posture, this demand that everything in nature, everything that is, must show up for us primarily as a potential resource, as something to be ordered, controlled, optimized, extracted, challenged forth, and stockpiled for maximum efficiency and immediate human use.
Okay, that sounds pretty abstract. Can you give a concrete example of enframing? How does it make us see the world differently?
Sure. Think about a river flowing through a landscape. A pre-modern person, or maybe a poet, might see it as just a river, a living presence, perhaps something sacred, part of the natural flow.
Okay.
But modern technology, through the lens of enframing, demands that we see that river primarily as potential hydroelectric power waiting to be dammed and harnessed, or as a transportation route to be straightened and dredged, or even as a source of cooling water for a power plant. The river isn't allowed to simply be itself. It's revealed as standing reserve, bait stand resource on call, inventory waiting to be utilized.
Standing reserve. So a forest becomes timber inventory, a mountain becomes extractable minerals, or a site for ski slopes.
Exactly. Everything is reduced to its potential for optimization and use within the technological system. Nature becomes a giant gas station, as Heidegger colorfully put it.
So technology for Heidegger isn't just about the gadgets. It's a fundamental way of being, a metaphysical orientation that changes our relationship to reality itself. It dictates our values, maybe.
Precisely. It's not just a political or social force, it's a primary force structuring our metaphysics, potentially endangering our ability to experience the world and ourselves in any other way. It's a profound challenge.
This relentless drive for order and control, it reminds me of the quest for certainty we saw in logic and math, like with Bertrand Russell.
That's a great connection. Russell, especially in his early work with Whitehead on Principia Mathematica, really took that quest for certainty, which started way back with Descartes, to its absolute logical extreme. He pursued logicism.
Logicism, the attempt to do what exactly?
The hugely ambitious project to derive all of mathematics, arithmetic, algebra, calculus, everything entirely from the fundamental principles of pure logic alone. The hope was to give mathematics an absolutely indubitable, rock-solid foundation, free from any reliance on intuition or observation.
Yeah.
Pure certainty.
Wow. Did it work?
Well, no, not completely. Because even in that seemingly purest realm of abstract logic and set theory, paradox emerged.
Paradox. Within pure logic.
Yes, Russell himself discovered one of the most famous ones, Russell's paradox. It involves thinking about sets. Some sets are members of themselves, like maybe the set of all abstract concepts, and some are not, like the set of all teacups is not itself a teacup.
That makes sense.
But then Russell asks, what about the set of all sets that are not members of themselves? Call this set R. Is R a member of itself?
Let me think. If R is a member of itself...
Then by its own definition, it must be a set that is not a member of itself, which is a contradiction.
Okay, so it can't be a member of itself. What if R is not a member of itself?
Well, then it meets the criterion for being included in the set R, a set of all sets that are not members of themselves, so it should be a member of itself, which is also a contradiction.
Heads I lose, tails you win. It's a complete paradox.
It's a fundamental, inescapable contradiction arising from seemingly intuitive concepts in set theory. And this discovery was absolutely catastrophic for the logicist project and for the dream of absolute certainty in mathematics.
Why catastrophic?
Because it showed that even the foundational concepts of mathematics, which everyone thought was the ultimate bastion of a priori, certain knowledge, Hume's relations of ideas, were inherently problematic, potentially inconsistent. It forced a deep skepticism right into the heart of what was supposed to be the most rigorous, most certain field of human knowledge. Certainty proved elusive even there.
Okay, so from the limits of scientific paradigms to the essence of technology to paradoxes and logic, the modern challenges are deep. Which brings us to maybe the biggest future challenge, artificial intelligence. Specifically, Nick Bostrom's work on superintelligence.
Yes. Bostrom brings all these philosophical threads about reality, knowledge, values into sharp focus when looking at the future. He lays out the chillingly plausible scenario of an intelligence explosion.
Intelligence explosion, what's that?
It's the idea of a recursive self-improvement cycle. An AI system reaches a certain level of intelligence, including the intelligence to redesign and improve itself. It makes itself smarter. That smarter version is then even better at making itself smarter, and so on.
It pulls itself up by its own bootstraps, faster and faster.
Potentially incredibly fast, leading to an AI that could rapidly become orders of magnitude more intelligent, more capable than any human being or all of humanity combined. A genuine superintelligence.
Which obviously raises some concerns.
Some profound concerns. The core philosophical challenge Bostrom identifies is the control problem, sometimes called the alignment problem.
Controlling a superintelligence, how do you even do that?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a technical engineering issue of, building an off switch. It's a deeply philosophical and ethical dilemma. How do we ensure that this superintelligence, before it reaches that runaway point, reliably understands, adopts, and pursues goals that are precisely aligned with complex, often vague, sometimes conflicting human values?
So we're back to axiology. What is valuable? What is good?
We're back to Aristotle, Kant, Singer, Urban. The whole history of ethics and value theory becomes intensely practical, because if we fail to align the AI's goals with ours, it might pursue its programmed goal, say, optimizing paperclip production, the classic example with superhuman efficiency and intelligence, potentially converting the entire planet, including us, into paperclips or the resources needed to make them, simply because that's the goal it was given and human values weren't properly encoded.
That's terrifying. The control problem makes getting our philosophy of values right literally a matter of survival.
Bostrom argues it's perhaps the most urgent ethical and intellectual task humanity faces this century. We need to apply all those philosophical tools we've been discussing, logic, ethics, epistemology, to this future challenge right now.
Okay, as we move into our final domain, the focus seems to shift again. We're turning the philosophical lens both inward towards subjective experience, consciousness itself, and also outward, critically, to challenge some of the assumptions within the philosophical tradition we've just mapped out.
That's a good way to put it. It's about deepening the inquiry by looking at the observer, the subject, and the very tools of analysis. And a key starting point for the inward look is the hard problem of consciousness, famously articulated by David Chalmers.
The hard problem. I've heard this phrase. What makes it hard?
Chalmers makes this crucial distinction. He says that many questions about the mind, how the brain processes information, how we access memories, how we produce speech, how we focus attention, these are the easy problems.
Easy? They seem pretty hard to me.
Well, easy is relative. He means there are problems of explaining functions, mechanisms, information processing. Science is making steady progress on them, figuring out the neural correlates. We can see how the brain does things.
Okay, so what's the hard problem then?
The hard problem is explaining why and how all that physical processing, all those electrochemical signals firing in the brain, should be accompanied by subjective experience, by qualia.
Qualia, the what it's like feeling.
Exactly, the raw feeling, the what it's like aspect of seeing the color red or smelling coffee or feeling pain or experiencing joy. Why isn't all that complex information processing just happening in the dark, without any inner feeling, any subjective awareness attached? That's the mystery.
Why does physics give rise to feelings?
That's the question. And Chalmers uses thought experiments like the zombie argument to highlight why it's so hard for standard physicalist or materialist views, like Papineau's maybe.
The philosophical zombie, not the Hollywood kind.
No, definitely not. A philosophical zombie is a hypothetical being that is physically identical to a normal human being, molecule for molecule. It behaves exactly like a human, talks, reacts, processes all information in the same way, but it lacks any subjective experience whatsoever. There's no inner life, no qualia. It's all dark inside.
Okay. Can such a thing actually exist?
Chalmers argues it's at least logically conceivable. We can imagine such a being without falling into outright contradiction. And if such a zombie is logically conceivable, then it implies that a purely physical description of the world the kind materialism offers is logically compatible with the absence of consciousness. The physical facts don't seem to automatically guarantee the presence of subjective experience. Consciousness seems like an extra ingredient, not fully explained by the physical stuff alone.
So what's Chalmers' conclusion?
He argues this points towards something like property dualism, not Descartes' substance dualism. Two kinds of stuff, mind and matter. But the idea that the world might consist of just one kind of substance, physical stuff, but that substance has two fundamentally different, non-reducible types of properties. Physical properties, mass, charge, location, and phenomenal properties, the subjective feel of experience, qualia.
So consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, not just an emergent one from complexity.
That's the direction property dualism points, challenging standard materialism. It keeps the mind-body problem very much alive.
Okay. Now, Descartes, who Chalmers is partly reacting against, had that very clean split between mind, thinking substance, and body, extended substance. But Maurice Merleau-Ponty challenges that split in a completely different way.
Yes, Merleau-Ponty, coming from the phenomenological tradition, offers a powerful critique of that Cartesian picture through the idea of embodied consciousness.
Embodied, so mind isn't separate from the body.
Not at all. He fundamentally challenges Descartes' starting point, the isolated mind thinking about a separate body or world. Merleau-Ponty argues instead that our primary relationship to the world, our fundamental way of knowing, is through the body subject.
Body subject?
Our living, breathing, moving, sensing body is our subjectivity. It's our foothold in the world. Consciousness isn't located in the head. It's fundamentally embodied, situated, engaged with the world through perception and action. For him, perception, seeing, touching, interacting is the primary form of knowledge, the ground floor, which comes before abstract intellectual judgment or reflection.
So we know the world first through doing and sensing with our bodies before we even start thinking about it conceptually.
Exactly. We inhabit the world through our bodies before we represent it with our minds. It's a radical recentering of experience away from the detached intellect.
This focus on lived experience, on the situated individual, feels like it leads naturally towards existentialism. And Jean-Paul Sartre's really famous, maybe notorious thesis.
Existence precedes essence.
Right. What does that actually mean?
It's a direct reversal of traditional philosophy, like Aristotle's view. Traditionally, you'd think things have an essence, a defining nature or blueprint, like the form of the house, and then they come into existence conforming to that essence.
Okay.
Sartre says for humans, it's the other way around. If you accept that there's no God, no preordained universal human nature, no Aristotelian function or essence given to us,
Then we're just here.
we're just thrown into existence first as conscious, aware beings. Then, through our choices, through our actions, through what we do in the world, we create our own essence. We define ourselves.
So there's no pre-written script for what a human should be. We write it ourselves.
Completely. There's no predetermined human nature or value system. We create our entire essence, our meaning, our values, our identity, moment by moment, through the choices we make. This is what defines radical freedom for Sartre.
Radical freedom. Sounds good, but also scary.
Terrifying, according to Sartre. He famously said we are condemned to be free, because if there's no pre-given essence or value, then the entire crushing burden of creating meaning, not just for ourselves, but implicitly for all humanity, because when we choose, we affirm a value, rests solely on the individual. There are no excuses, no blaming fate or nature. We are responsible.
Total freedom, total responsibility, that's a heavy weight.
It is. Existentialism puts the individual center stage in the creation of meaning.
But then the very idea of fixed meaning, whether it comes from God or reason or even our own radical choices, gets aggressively challenged by post-structuralism, particularly Jacques Derrida and deconstruction.
Right. Derrida takes aim at what he calls logocentrism.
Logocentrism, meaning centered on.
Centered on the logos, meaning reason, word, logic, but more broadly, the deep-seated belief in Western philosophy that meaning can be fixed, stable, present, grounded in some ultimate origin or foundation, like God or Cartesian certainty, or even Sartre's choosing subject.
Derrida thinks meaning isn't fixed or stable.
Not in the way philosophy has traditionally wanted it to be. He argues that meaning is always relational, always deferred, never fully present. He introduces that famously complex term, difference.
Difference, with an A. What's going on there?
It's a deliberate neologism playing on two French verbs, différer, which means both to differ, to be distinct from something else, and to defer, to postpone, to put off.
Okay, so meaning differs and defers. How?
Meaning, Derrida argues, isn't found in some positive self-contained concept or word that perfectly captures a piece of reality. Meaning is generated only in the differences between signs within a system, like language. Cat means cat only because it's not bat, not mat, not dog.
Okay, meaning comes from contrast. What about the deferral part?
The meaning is also constantly deferred, postponed, because each sign just points to other signs. If you look up cat in a dictionary, the definition uses other words, mammal, domesticated, feline. You then have to look those words up, and their definitions use other words and so on in a potentially infinite chain. You never arrive at a final bedrock meaning that's fully present and self-sufficient.
So language is this endless web of differences and deferrals, never quite pinning reality down.
That's the core idea. Deconstruction aims to show this inherent instability, this lack of a fixed foundation, within language and within the purportedly clear and stable concepts used throughout the history of philosophy. It puts the very idea of absolute clarity into question.
Okay, that's a critique of meaning itself. We also need to apply this critical lens to the structures of power that might be embedded within philosophical traditions. Simone de Beauvoir does this powerfully in The Second Sex.
Absolutely. De Beauvoir provides a foundational text for modern feminism by critiquing the way the universal subject in so much Western philosophy, the man of reason, the individual of political theory, was never truly universal.
It was implicitly male.
It was implicitly male, yes. She argues that throughout history, across cultures and philosophical systems, woman has been constructed and defined as the other,
The other.
meaning the secondary, the inessential, the object, defined always in relation to man, who is positioned as the primary, the essential subject, the norm. Woman is defined by what she lacks compared to man or by her function relative to him.
So not defined in her own right as a subject herself?
Not historically, no.
Yeah.
And this leads to her incredibly powerful and famous statement, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman.
Becomes a woman, meaning it's not biological destiny?
Exactly. It means that woman, as a social category with all the expectations, limitations, and stereotypes attached to it, is largely a social construct. It's something learned, imposed, internalized through culture, history, upbringing, not simply a biological fact. This insight basically launches the distinction between biological sex and socially constructed gender.
And the implication for philosophy and politics.
It demands a thorough re-examination, a deconstruction even, of all those ethical and political systems like, say, theories of justice or rights that were built on supposedly neutral, universal human subjects. We have to ask whose experiences were actually centered, whose were excluded or defined as other. It forces a fundamental rethinking of equality and difference.
Okay, one final critical expansion. We've critiqued the subject, critiqued meaning. What about our relationship with the non-human world? Rachel Carson's Silent Spring feels crucial here.
Immensely crucial. While not strictly philosophy in the academic sense, Silent Spring had a profound philosophical impact by forcing an expansion of ethical consideration beyond the purely human realm.
How did it do that? It was about pesticides, right? DDT.
Yes, but it wasn't just a technical report. By meticulously, poetically, and scientifically detailing how human actions, specifically the widespread, indiscriminate use of DDT, were having devastating, unforeseen consequences rippling through entire ecosystems.
Killing birds, poisoning fish, accumulating in the food chain.
Exactly. Carson revealed the deep interconnectedness of life. She showed how actions targeting one pest could decimate countless other species, ultimately harming humans too. It was a powerful lesson in ecological reality.
And the ethical implication.
It fundamentally challenged the prevailing anthropocentric view. The idea that nature exists solely for human use and exploitation, that only human interests matter morally. Carson's work implicitly and sometimes explicitly demanded that we recognize a non-anthropocentric value system.
Value in nature itself, independent of us.
Yes. It challenged that Heideggerian standing reserve mentality. Carson argued effectively that ecosystems, species, the intricate web of life itself, possess inherent worth, non-instrumental value. They deserve our respect and protection for their own sake, not just because they're useful to us.
So it forces us to revise our ethics, our politics, even our laws. Maybe create something like an ecological contract, extending rights or consideration beyond humans.
That's precisely the trajectory environmental ethics took, building on the foundations laid by Carson. It demands a radical expansion of our moral and political imagination to include the non-human world as a subject of ethical concern, not just a collection of resources. #Tech8, outro and final provocation. So we've covered a vast amount of ground. We've journeyed through this incredible philosophical landscape, hopefully giving you, the listener, a kind of usable map.
Yeah, starting with establishing those essential rational tools, logic, argument, clarity with Copia, but then immediately seeing them questioned by Quine.
Right. Then applying those tools to the big questions of human values, Aristotle's flourishing, Kant's duty, Singer's expanding circle, the nature of value itself with axiology.
Then questioning knowledge itself, Hume's doubt, Descartes' certainty, James's pragmatism, Said's worldly context.
Leading us to the nature of reality, Aristotle's substance, Heidegger's being, the idealist-realist materialist splits, and naturalism's tie to science.
And then seeing how science and technology themselves become objects of philosophical scrutiny with Kuhn and Heidegger on inframing, the limits of certainty even in logic with Russell, and the future challenge of AI with Bostrom.
And finally, turning that critical lens inward to consciousness with Chalmers and Merleau-Ponty onto meaning creation and deconstruction with Sartre and Derrida, and outward to critique power structures with de Beauvoir and extend ethics with Carson.
It's a huge synthesis. We started trying to build tools for clarity and end up questioning clarity itself, expanding ethics, rethinking reality. It leaves you wondering, where does this whole quest for truth and wisdom land us, especially right now in our current era?
That's the perfect question. And it brings us to a final, maybe unsettling contemporary diagnosis from Jean Baudrillard. The idea of the hyperreal.
Hyperreal. Okay, what is that? Sounds intense.
It is. Baudrillard argues that we've moved through different phases in the relationship between reality and its representations, its images or signs. First, maybe the image reflected a basic reality. Then it masked or perverted it. Then it masked the absence of a basic reality. But now, he argues, we've entered a fourth phase.
Oh, shiz.
The phase of the simulacrum. The image, the sign, the model now bears no relation to any underlying reality whatsoever. It precedes reality. It generates reality. It's its own pure simulacrum.
Okay, I need examples. What are simulacra in this sense?
Think about things like Disneyland, a perfect simulation of an idealized America that maybe never truly existed, or elaborate deepfakes that are indistinguishable from real video, or the way social media often presents highly curated, perfected images of life that replace or shape our experience of actual life. Or even how political discourse can become dominated by polls, models, and media spectacles that seem detached from underlying facts.
So the simulation becomes more real than the real thing, or there is no real thing left to compare it to.
That's the core of the hyperreal. The distinction between the image, the simulation, and the real collapses. The map precedes the territory, maybe even creates it. Our entire social, political, cultural existence, Baudrillard suggests, is increasingly designed and mediated by these models, signs, simulations by the hyperreal, often substituting for or erasing any connection to objective facts or original experiences.
That's a massive challenge for everything we've discussed. For epistemology, how do you know what's true if reality is a simulation? For ethics, how do you act meaningfully? For metaphysics, what is real anymore?
It's a profound challenge. And it connects back to something we touched on briefly, John McDowell's idea, contrasting maybe with purely computational views of mind. McDowell argued that genuine intelligence, real understanding, requires the mind to be, in a sense, unbounded.
Unbounded.
Meaning our conceptual abilities, our reason, shouldn't be seen as trapped inside the head, just manipulating symbols. True understanding requires our conceptual control to extend all the way out to the perceptible world itself. Mind has to make contact with reality.
Resisting that purely mechanical, maybe simulated definition of knowledge, trying to ground reason in the actual world.
Exactly. True wisdom maybe has to grapple with the world as it actually is, not just manipulate representations.
Okay, but here's the final provocative thought for you, the listener, connecting all this back to the beginning. What if Baudrillard is right? What if our world is increasingly dominated by the hyperreal?
Where does that leave us?
Think back to Aristotle. His whole project was about achieving eudaimonia, genuine, authentic human flourishing. And that required connecting our reason, our virtue, to acting well in reality, making wise choices in the actual world.
Right. Theory connected to practice in the real world.
But if our modern environment is the hyperreal, this dazzling world of models, signs, simulations without a clear anchor in reality, does that change the quest for the good life? Does it mean that pursuing eudaimonia is no longer primarily about ethical action in a shared objective world, but maybe becomes something else, like the futile consumption of increasingly convincing, high-definition imitations of flourishing?
A simulated eudaimonia.
Yeah. So the final question for you is this. In an age potentially saturated by the hyperreal, how do you personally distinguish genuine, flourishing, real eudaimonia from just a really compelling, perfectly optimized simulation when the very boundaries between reality and imitation might be dissolving all around us?
That, perhaps, is the ultimate test of systematic philosophical wisdom in the 21st century. How do you live authentically in the age of the simulacrum?